Hello everyone and welcome to the show. I'm Rick Wingrove. I'm the Capillary Director for American Atheists. I'm the founder of Beltway Atheists and the creator of FlameWarrior.com. To my left is Rob Penczak.
Hi, thanks Rick. Welcome everyone. I'm Rob Penczak, a physician turned writer and the father of 3 children who should end up inheriting a better world than the one they're currently poised to receive. And as a secularist, I think it's important that we start treating each other better in the here and now instead of jockeying for position in some hereafter that may never come. And at this point, I think I'd like to thank a number of people who are helping us get the word out about secular America. First, I'd like to thank Paul Sheehan, better known as Radio Paul, the producer of Road to Reason, for putting this show together and for being a driving force behind the scenes, along with several volunteers who help us out each week here at Fairfax Public Access. Second, I'd like to thank the Richard Dawkins Foundation for its generous support, both financially and also through the person of evolutionary psychologist Dr. Elizabeth Cornwell, one of our rotating hosts here. And finally, to our host this week, Rick Wingrove, who's been fighting the good fight as an activist for close to 20 years, in hopes that the 50 or 60 million agnostics and atheists living all around our country will soon be able to step out of their closets into an accepting, secular America. Now this week, we're going to be talking about something near and dear to everybody's heart, the separation of church and state. And Rick, I'd like to ask you, how many Jack Daniels would it take for you to believe that we're actually living in what should be a Christian nation based on its founders' precepts?
Well, Rob, when I drink tequila. So it would take a few shots, though. But we are not a Christian nation. That's a legal distinction that is simply unsupported by the facts. There are a lot of Christians here, but we are not a Christian nation. That's a lot of wishful thinking, bad history, and self-serving revisionism by the worst elements of religion. And they've conveniently forgotten the history and the horrors that are inevitably perpetrated against humanity in the name of a loving God. Thomas Jefferson said this: "Religious institutions that use government power in support of themselves and force their views on persons of other faiths or of no faith undermine all our civil rights. Moreover, state support of an established religion tends to make the clergy unresponsive to their own people and leads to corruption within religion itself. Erecting the wall of separation between church and state, therefore, is absolutely essential in a free society." The government of the United States is exactly what the Constitution says it is. The powers, the authority, and the limitations are precisely spelled out, and the Constitution simply does not provide a role for religion in government. From the start, separation is woven into the very fabric of the Constitution. The Constitution does not endorse religion. The Constitution is a firewall against theocracy. Those who would impose Christian Sharia on the American people are acting counter to the letter and spirit of the Constitution. What they propose is un-American and destructive of freedom and our founding principles. That religion was excluded from the Constitution was no accident. It's far more than a passive exclusion. It wasn't something that got overlooked until it came back from the printers. It is an intentional prohibition that applies to religion. Those among the founders who wanted the United States to have an official religion had every chance to make their case. But when the vote came, it was determined that that would be a stupid idea. So that view did not prevail, and the Constitution was created as an entirely, purposefully secular document. It turns out that religion is not really needed to fill potholes. The founders had a rare opportunity to create a new government on a clean sheet of paper. The founders were also well aware of the greed, the violence, and the larceny at the heart of Europe's theocracies. The Inquisition was just last week for these guys. James Madison said this: "During almost 15 centuries has the legal establishment of Christianity been on trial. And what has been its fruits? More or less in all places, pride and indolence in the clergy, ignorance and servility in the laity, and in both superstition, bigotry, and persecution." In fact, religion is mentioned only twice in the Constitution. The last line of Article 6 of the Constitution says this: "No religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States." This is a prohibition against religion, clearly stating that religion cannot be a condition of government service. Religion is mentioned again in the first clause of the First Amendment of the Constitution. The First Amendment requires that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. It's another prohibition, and it's one that applies only to religion. It means that the government cannot dictate or create an official religion for the United States, period. Government must be neutral on the subject of religion. The rest of that clause continues, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. A lot of separation deniers seem to think that this, in effect, negates the Establishment Clause and exempts them from taxation or from common courtesy or from any requirement to respect the rights of others. But what it really means is that you can believe anything you want to, but so can everyone else. That means that your free exercise stops where mine begins. It also means that you cannot impose your religion upon the unconvinced or the unwilling, and certainly not by force of law. And what could be fairer than that? The upshot of this is that the rights of atheists are exactly equal to those of the loudest, angriest, and most entitled believers. And as James Madison said, the purpose of separation of church and state is to keep forever from these shores the ceaseless strife that has soaked the soil of Europe in blood for centuries. So, Rob, divorcing religion from government is probably the most brilliant thing the founders did. It's kept us free from partisan violence in this country for over 2 centuries. It's hard to do better than that.
Well, like you pointed out, understanding religious persecution wasn't just a cerebral exercise for our founders. They actually lived the nightmare. And that's why they didn't want to leave one scrap of doubt as to whether our nation was going to be secular or religion-based. Now, you're a veteran, right?
I am. U.S. Navy, Vietnam era.
Okay, then I'd like you to listen closely to this clip, see if you can name the tune, and then tell us what it has to do with this whole discussion about the separation of church and state.
Rob, that's the Marine Corps hymn, and it talks about Tripoli, which is the Tripoli of modern Libya. And of course, this is a reference to the Treaty of Tripoli, which was negotiated by George Washington, signed by John Adams, and unanimously ratified by the Senate. And the key phrase in the Treaty of Tripoli is in Article 11, as the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. And that's a pretty clear statement.
Wow, so not founded on the Christian religion, right there in black and white. So given that, given the absolute clarity that our founders made sure to put in there, what do you say to the argument about separating church and state not being in the Constitution? You know, those words, that exact phrase not being there. Does that mean that, you know, it shouldn't hold?
Well, a lot of separation deniers think that they have the killer argument when they observe that the phrase separation of church and state is not in the Constitution. The implication is that if it doesn't say it explicitly in the text, then it just ain't so. But to this I say, where in the Constitution is the word democracy? You'll find, surprisingly, it's just not in there. Does that mean we're not a democracy? Well, of course not. Democracy, like separation, is not specifically named, but they are the bricks and mortar of the Constitution. Because the Constitution provides for an elected government, we are indeed a democracy, or a modified form of democracy. And because the founders provided no role for religion in government, there is no role for religion in government. And we do indeed have our Constitution as a barrier between civilized people and the return of the Inquisition. By the way, some of the other words not in the Constitution, besides democracy: freedom, capitalism, corporation, job creator, nor the words gun or flag. But most glaringly absent from all of that, and fatal to the notion of a Christian nation, the words God, Jesus, Christ, or Christian nation are not in the Constitution. The phrase freedom of religion is not even in the Constitution. It starts with we the people and does include the words general welfare twice. So despite the Constitution and the lessons of history, religion still attempts to inflict itself through intrusion into our politics and our government.
Well, I'd say it certainly is telling that they didn't choose to include very common words back then like Jesus and Christ and God. It seems like they made a very conscious decision. And you're absolutely right about religion intruding itself into the public sphere. Because if there's some new law that gets made about women's rights where they need to get a transvaginal ultrasound to verify what's inside of their womb, and they want to have an abortion, that affects everybody. It doesn't just affect the religious zealots who believe that their husband is the master of the house and they want to bear his seed into the future. This affects everybody, all women, no matter what their religious feelings are. And by the same token, if Noah's Ark lays plank in our school system, all of our kids get affected for the worse. It's not just the ones that choose to homeschool because they don't want secular education coming into their lives. It's every single child, including mine. So I couldn't agree more about our founders being very wise in separating church from state. But that's really just my opinion. and your opinion, and the opinion of all historians who aren't evangelically based, pretty much. But here in the fair and balanced America of Rupert Murdoch and Roger Ailes, every argument has two sides, even when it doesn't have two sides. In fact, especially when it doesn't have two sides. When I'm trying to figure out where the truth lies on First Amendment issues, no, I don't usually turn to that. The Fox Wrecking Crew has really used the freedom of the press to do whatever they want, and they're certainly not much of a news organization. But when I need to know if God, let's say, loves all people, or if it's just the straights that he cares for, and whether he's really pro-Israel, or just can't wait to get to the Jews at Armageddon, I usually turn to, no, not Rush Limbaugh, no, not Ann Coulter, though again, freedom of speech, if it can withstand the invectives of this pair, I suppose that the First Amendment is doing okay. But today we're focusing on church and state. And what I was going to say is that like any good, true-blooded, heterosexual American male born in the mid-60s, when I'm feigning doubt about heaven and earth, I naturally turn to the angels. Charlie's Angels. Charlie and Dave, Charles and David Koch, the billionaire Koch brothers, and the airy angels of the AstroTurf Tea Party. And look, Antonin Scalia and Clarence Thomas stop by for tea and cookies. How nice. Now let's see what our angels can tell us about the founding of our nation. Angels?
America is a Christian nation.
I have said all along that America is based on Judeo-Christian beliefs, and nobody has to believe me, though. You can just go to our founding fathers' early documents and see how they crafted a Declaration of Independence and a Constitution that allows that Judeo-Christian belief to be the foundation of our laws, and our Constitution, of course, essentially acknowledging that our unalienable rights don't come from man, they come from God.
So the woman who could have just been one heartbeat from the Oval Office has just affirmed that we are indeed a Judeo-Christian nation. Now, does she need to watch our show? And what about our inalienable rights, and coming from God or coming from somewhere else?
Well, inalienable rights is a phrase that's in the Declaration of Independence, not in the Constitution. The Declaration of Independence is basically a declaration of war against England, but those words simply are not in the Constitution. The Constitution starts with the consent of the governed as our moral authority, and that's been the case since the Enlightenment.
All right, and Sarah Palin was also telling us about us being a Christian nation. Can you say a few words about what our founders were in terms of deists versus theists?
Well, a great number of our founders, as we know, were deists, and they were considered by many to be atheists. In my view, they were functionally atheists. It's just that was still a highly lethal word to use.
Right, back then they were very much disowned by the whole movement of Christianity, as they were the enemy.
Right, and somehow deism somehow got in under the radar. They didn't treat deists too badly. But the point is that our founders were largely deists, and were children of the Enlightenment, and because of that, we got the Constitution we got.
Okay. All right. Let's see what else our angels have to tell us.
It's ironic that here on the National Day of Prayer, there's so much controversy about whether or not we're a nation that's built on Judeo-Christian beliefs, and whether or not we can even talk about God in the public square.
Well, all I have to do is walk into the Supreme
hearing.
Court chamber and you'll see the Ten Commandments. And so we know that you're absolutely correct. The Founding Fathers did base not only the Declaration of Independence, but the constitutional protections on what they thought was right and wrong, and what they thought was right and wrong came from the Ten Commandments, which is Judeo-Christian philosophy. That is beyond a reasonable doubt.
All right, what about that, a National Day of Prayer? What's the atheist beef with a National Day of Prayer? Are we really just out to ban all spirituality, like they said there?
Well, we're not out to ban spirituality. Our focus is on separation of church and state, and it is simply not the business of government to be providing, championing, offering up religion in any context ever.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, that atheists and scientists are not against a transcendental experience or anything spiritual. We just don't want a religious set of rules governing our lives and our family lives and everybody's lives.
Yeah, it's not the place of government to be injecting sectarian prayers into the mainstream. It's just not their job.
Now, another thing that they kind of slipped in there was the very clear notion that our founders drew their morality from the Ten Commandments. Do you think that's Is that just a given, like they said, that we're all about the Ten Commandments?
Well, that's a common claim among deniers and people who aren't very well versed in history, is that our legal system is based on the Ten Commandments. This is just false. It is just so wrong. And if you want to see a deer in the headlights, ask somebody who's saying that, somebody who's championing or who's saying that our laws are based on the Ten Commandments. Ask them to name the Ten Commandments. You'll see a deer in the headlights. But what are the Ten Commandments? Well, first one is, you shall have no other gods before me. Number 2 is graven images, no graven images. Number 3 is don't take the Lord's name in vain. Number 4 is keep the Sabbath holy. Now these first 4 are not, cannot be, and have never been the law of the land in the United States. Under our Constitution, they cannot be, because these are specifically, directly related to the proper worship of the alleged Christian deity.
And they don't do very much for us either as moral guidelines for how to live.
Not at all. The last 6 commandments, honor your parents, children or teenagers and children who talk back to the parents need to be killed according to the Bible. Next, don't kill, ironically.
And you don't think you needed a stone tablet to tell you not to kill?
Oh, I didn't need one. I'm pretty clear on that. Number 7 was adultery. Number 8 was don't steal. Number 9, don't lie. And number 10, don't covet. Those are all essentially humanist values which predated the Ten Commandments and were widely, if not totally practiced by every civilization on earth. As far as law goes, there's only 3 of these that are even laws in the United States. Don't kill, don't steal, and don't lie. And don't lie is only under oath. So really only 2 of these are even reflected in the law of the United States. So to say that our legal system is based upon the Ten Commandments is ignorant and wrong.
Yeah, it does seem a stretch. All right, let's go back to our angels once more and see what else they got to tell us.
Opponents of spirituality in the public marketplace say, hey, this is a violation. We can't be pushing any kind of spirituality. And you answer?
Well, that new kind of worldview that I think is kind of those steps towards this fundamental transformation of America that some want to see today. I think, again, that it is an attempt to revisit and rewrite history. I think we should just kind of keep this clean, keep it simple, go back to what our founders and our founding documents meant. They're quite clear that we would create law based on the God of the Bible and the Ten Commandments. It's pretty simple.
In that clip, they made the point that it seems like the atheists are real historical revisionists. And I don't know how we kind of square that, because if you watch a lot of the conservative news, most of America that isn't fixed to Fox News calls it faux news, or just knows that it's highly, it's incredible. They always bend the truth and they just make up truths whenever convenient. They also ended with something saying that our founders wanted to create law based on the Bible and the Ten Commandments, and it was absolutely clear they wanted to do that. Is that absurd?
Well, it is absurd. Our legal system is actually based on English common law, and this is easy to find out. I mean, it's Law 101 in the United States. So again, just another claim they make to try to tie our legal system to Scripture, but it's just not true.
All right, so just saying something doesn't make it so.
Saying something does not make it so. Facts matter here.
They do
and
matter.
Facts do not support their contention.
Yeah. All right, why don't we go to our second angel now and see what Sharon Engels has to tell us.
We also know that we can't do it by ourselves. Harry Reid says he needs $25 million. I say I need 1 million people with $25 to go to SharonEngel.com.
All right, now the first thing about that clip I noticed is that Ms. Engels is petitioning for all of these grassroots people, the supporters, to pitch in and help her out. Right? She wants 1 million people to give her $25. Is she completely oblivious to the fact that the billionaire Koch brothers are funding her movement and the Tea Party, or is she just being disingenuous?
Well, both. I saw a thing on TV recently where some people were, members of the Tea Party were being interviewed, and they were talking about how they were totally a grassroots organization. Mm-hmm. And then somebody pointed out to them that they're actually funded largely by the Koch brothers. And, however they started and whatever their intentions were, they were quickly co-opted by big money interests. And it is big money and powerful people driving their agenda. Right. And it's a very repressive agenda too.
It's very repressive, and with legislation with Citizens United, it just seems where it's going to get worse and worse unless we somehow get that repealed, where you can have big money funding fake grassroots movements everywhere, and it's hard to see how we can save our democracy if that doesn't get fixed.
Well, true. It is disheartening, especially with Citizens United, to see the influence that money has, and it's to watch that in action. It just looks like corruption to me, and something clearly needs to be done.
Yeah. All right. So I think we agree that it really has been co-opted there. However, the Tea Party movement started at this point, it's very fraudulent. Now, in terms of separating church and state, they also mentioned that being unconstitutional. Are we supposed to believe that? And she does this while Engels is saying that she and Jefferson have both been misquoted. Are they kindred spirits of some sort?
Well, it's kind of funny to see people from the Tea Party, especially the extreme religious right, quoting Jefferson. I'm at a loss to see how Jefferson helps their case ever. Mm-hmm. And they misquote him, and there's a famous quote by George Washington I don't have in front of me, but it's just a made-up quote. Mm-hmm. So a lot of their quotes are made up, altered, and certainly don't make their case.
Yeah, and I hope I don't mix up this name. If it was Barden, who's one of their favored revisionist historians, who had to have his book pulled because they ran into so many fallacious statements in there that even the religious right was starting to say this is too embarrassing and it's too readily disproved.
The second edition of it had, I believe, 11 of his quotes had to be pulled because they were simply not found anywhere in literature except in his book.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Why don't we move on to our third and final angel here, Michelle Bachmann, and see if she can help enlighten us about the enlightened, founders of our country.
Hi, my name is Michelle Bachmann.
Hi, Angel. What are you up to today?
Today I filed the necessary paperwork to seek the office of the Presidency of the United States.
Holy crap! President? That would make
This is a historic day for our nation. This is the first day of taking our country back. I worked very hard to bring your voice to the halls of Congress. Now I want to take your voice into the White House, where it hasn't been heard for a long time. Because with your common sense and with your energy working together, we will take our country back.
Now, since Michelle Bachmann mentioned common sense in passing, let's just assume that she's trying to associate herself with Thomas Paine, as just like Engels and Jefferson were close friends. But as for taking our country back, which she mentioned twice there, who exactly is Michelle Bachmann trying to take the country back from, and who is the we that are doing the taking? Are we secular Americans included in Michelle Bachmann's grand vision?
Well, the religious right seems to feel entitled to rule, and the Republicans as their main voice. They just feel like it's wrong if anybody but them runs the country. So I don't know who they're taking the country back from. The majority voters who elected the existing government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not always clear if they're talking about if this has some racial overtones or if it's it's really hard to figure out. But it certainly seems frightening, and I'm fairly sure that they're not talking for me.
Well, yeah, and I think there certainly is an element of racial, of racism in it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let's go back to Michelle Bachmann again and see what else she can tell us about.
I think it's time that we give everyone in the United States the right of freedom of speech and expression. It appears to be only in the churches where there's censorship of speech, and I'm against censorship.
That time she spoke about censorship in the churches, that the churches are the only places that seem to get censored. Is this another attempt at humor, or is she actually serious?
Well, I think she's serious, and I really don't know what she means by censorship. I don't know where and when they're censored, other than the fact that we push back when they try to use government to perpetrate or impose their religion on others. And that's at the heart of separation of church and state. It is not an absolute right for them to, their religion is not an absolute right. They can talk about it all they want to inside the church walls. There's never any pushback against them. But there are certain instances out here in the real world with a lot of people who are not Christians and who are not whatever sect of Christianity that speaker may be. But you just don't have free license to dominate the conversation, to dominate the town square with your religion. That is antithetical to separation of church and state.
Yeah, just the whole notion of hearing them talk about the censorship afflicting them when you look at the religious school boards that take over and then take out all the actual scientific teaching, it really seems absurd and again completely disingenuous for somebody like that to be claiming that they're suffering from censorship.
Well, right. Also, when somebody says something like censorship or anything they claim, it takes laws to do that. And I'd like to know where these laws are, or show me the law that's even proposed that affects their censorship, their speech. The only censorship, and it's not really censorship, it's just common courtesy just to not run over people who are not members of their particular religion.
All right. Well, let's see. Maybe she'll enlighten us on that. Let's go back to Michelle Bachmann again and see what else she has to say.
That, my friends, explains the story of this week. Islamic enforced speech codes. No one, not Muslims, not non-Muslims, not Americans, are allowed to say anything Islamists see as insulting to their religion. They intend to force us to kiss our freedom of speech and religion goodbye, and that's why we're being forewarned today.
All right. Now that clip, she was saying how talking about the Islamic, not just fundamentalists, but kind of all Muslim people, where you're not allowed to say anything that could possibly offend them. And she didn't seem to make any connection where we in the secular community aren't allowed to sort of talk about some of the crazy things that the religious right here in America is doing. And she just didn't make the connection. And I wonder if that was obvious to other people.
Well, I don't know. It's hard for me to judge what's going on in her head, but she is way misinformed about what separation of church and state means, what it implies, how it means that their rights do not supplant or override the rights of others. They need to be good citizens, and in a lot of cases that may just mean keeping your religion to yourself. It doesn't need to be an issue at all times.
Okay.
So.
All right. Well, I'm afraid that we're running out of time here. Next week, I'll be here with Elizabeth Cornwell. We'll be discussing some of the practical fallout of having a theocratically inspired legislation, how it affects reproductive health for men and women here in America and also abroad. So thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. We'll see you next week.